Just giving people a couple minutes to join us. Okay, we're going to give it about 30 more seconds and then we'll get started. I would recommend that you have your spiral. We went through that today in class and looked at everything that should be in this unit. One of the things that's great about this unit is that it's very linear. Everything is sort of in a clear timeline order because we talk about George Washington, the first president, John Adams, the second president, Thomas Jefferson, the third president, and it's all very okay. All right, it's 6:32, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So this is our Unit 6, the new nation, looking at our first three presidents, the beginning of political parties, and hot date 1803. I'm going to start with George Washington. Now, there's a kind of a lot of information, a lot of little facts about each person. So it's really important that you kind of come up with some ways of remembering different things of importance about different presidents and trying to make sure that you kind of have an idea of what each president is most known for and the major things that really happened in that person's presidency. So let's try to get this all down real quick. All right, so our number one, George Washington. Now, you covered information about George Washington in three places in your spiral. You have, if you are an on level, you have a little booklet. If you're in the 586 class, you have 4 pages of notes. You also did a number one notes worksheet, and our warm up last week was about his farewell address. So this is information that we should have seen repeatedly at this time. But so George Washington is our first president. He has no political party affiliation. He doesn't pick sides. The biggest thing that happens under George Washington is Hamilton's financial plan. Remember, the country was in debt after the American Revolution, so we owed a lot of money. And Hamilton comes up with this way to pay the money back, and it's TTB, taxes, tariffs, and bank. So he wants to increase taxes, he wants to put a tariff on foreign goods, and he wants to start a national bank. Okay, and these were all very controversial at the time. Okay, these were all very controversial at the time because it does not say in the Constitution that the government can do this. So it requires a loose interpretation of the Constitution. This idea in the warm up we started today about loose versus strict interpretation of the Constitution will kind of pop up again over and over again because it all comes back to, well, what exactly can the federal government do and what can they not do? And that's the basis for this major argument that's ongoing. So he has this plan, taxes, tariff, and banks. Hamilton says, yes, I want this plan. Jefferson says no, and he opposes him. So they're fighting over this, and they eventually come to a compromise. Hamilton gets his plan. He gets his taxes, he gets his tariff, and he gets his bank. And in return, the capital is going to move to the South. Now, this can feel very confusing to students because everything in here is about money except this random piece of the compromise. Okay. It's just except for this random piece of the compromise. So you have to remember that even though this is the major argument, at the same time this argument is happening, the Congress of the time under George Washington and George Washington's cabinet are George Washington's cabinet are arguing about where is the capital going to be. At the beginning, it's in New York City, and people are like, that's too far north. We want it to come to the south. We want it to be more in the middle. We want to make, and the whole basis of the concept is I get to win one of the arguments and you get to win the other argument. Hamilton gets to win the argument about the bank, and Jefferson gets to win the argument about the capital. And so that's why the capital feels like it comes out of nowhere. I also tell my students that you remember this is he's trying to pay debt. It causes conflict. They need a compromise by moving the capital. That's another way of kind of phrase you can remind yourself. Hamilton's financial plan. They want to pay the debt. It causes compromise. It causes conflicts. They reach a compromise by moving the capital. Pay debt, causes conflict, creates a compromise by moving the capital. Okay, we had the question. The Federalists wrote the Constitution, but they want a loose interpretation of it. Yes. And the reason why is when they wrote the Constitution, they were like, we're not writing down everything the federal government can do. The federal government can do a lot of things that are not listed. So loose is like with lots of powers. So if you think of loose as lots of powers. So in a loose interpretation, the federal government has lots of power. In a strict interpretation, it's literally word for word, only what's in there. Yeah, and super play, yes, the capital moves to Washington, D.C., where it currently is before. It was in New York, which they consider the North. They moved it to Virginia, which is considered the South. Okay. Okay, so loose, again, is lots of power for the federal government, and strict is word for word. If it's not listed in the Constitution, you cannot do it. And the Democratic Republicans want this because they don't like a strong federal government. So they want to make sure that federal government is limited. And so strict really keeps the government in control. Whereas loose says, oh, you have lots of powers that aren't listed. Okay, so that's Hamilton's financial plan, and that takes up the bulk of Washington's time. He also does a couple other things. Remember, we call him the president of precedents. He sets up a cabinet, and he's the first person to serve for 2 terms only, and he chooses to step down, and he does that to say no tyranny. So he says, I'm going to step down so nobody becomes a tyrant. Everyone should step down so nobody becomes a tyrant. Okay? The reason is because of tyranny. He wants to avoid tyranny. After Hamilton gets his taxes, Americans have never really been super fond of taxes. We just fought an American Revolution about it. So this group of farmers in Pennsylvania gets really angry. And this group of farmers in Pennsylvania, they have an uprising. They start burning some buildings and going around. Miss Potato, yes, he's the one with no political parties. He doesn't belong to any political party, which is why he has Jefferson and Hamilton telling him what to do, because he doesn't belong to either side. But anyway, so George Washington gets on his horse, puts on his uniform, and says, let's go and put that rebellion down, and he leads the army. And that's the rebellion, okay? And Washington wins the Whiskey Rebellion. Washington wins the Whiskey Rebellion, and you want a strong W because it shows that the government is strong. Not yet, baby. I'll come eat in a little bit. Okay, so it shows that the government is strong. This is different than Shays. Remember, Shays shows that we're weak. Whiskey shows that we are strong. And you got to remember, Washington wins the Whiskey Rebellion. It shows that they are strong. Okay, so that's sort of George Washington. And then last, and this was what our warm-up was on last week, so you know that's going to be important if it's a warm-up topic. Okay, and it's the farewell address, and he gives 2 pieces of advice. Okay, yes, and they run away because it's George Washington and nobody wants to fight the war here. George Washington. Give me just a second. And he says two pieces of advice: don't have political parties, which they ignore, and don't get involved in foreign alliances. That key word foreign, I noticed today a lot of people were missing that key word. The word foreign means outside of our country. So when he says stay neutral, he's talking about our interactions with other countries, with foreign countries. Okay. When he says stay neutral, he's talking about our interactions with foreign countries. So, and that's sort of a quick summarization of George Washington. Okay, again, really focus on, make sure you understand Hamilton's financial plan, that it creates this conflict, it leads to a compromise, and the compromise is moving the capital. And the compromise is moving the capital. He says no political parties, and he says stay neutral. Those are his two pieces of advice. Now, obviously, right after that, we talked about the political parties, because essentially, when Washington steps down, these two political factions rise up. And it's this split that happens because Hamilton and Jefferson are arguing about the power of the Constitution. And that's really at the heart of it. Okay. The heart of it is the Constitution. The heart of it is the Constitution. What's in the Constitution, what's allowed by the Constitution. That's at the heart of the creation of political parties. And we did the man with the hat, and we split them up. And it's the two political parties of Federalists and Anti-Federalists. Sorry, not Anti-Federalists. Democratic Republican are the two first political parties. That's the first political parties. And we drew our man, okay? And you have the Federalists and the Democratic Republican. Hamilton versus Jefferson. Hamilton versus Jefferson. And the root of the difference here is strict versus loose. Big federal government versus strong state government. So the Federalists obviously want a strong federal government. And they want a loose interpretation of the Constitution so that they can have lots of power. So loose, lots of power. And the Democratic Republicans want a strong state government. And they want a strict interpretation. You could also talk about, okay, you can also talk about how the Democratic Republicans supported farmers. So their support mostly comes from the South, whereas the Federalists supported industry. So their support mostly comes from the North. But the heart of the conflict is these two issues: states or federal. Okay, states or federal, loose or strict. And that's the split that causes the first political parties. That's the split that causes the first political parties. Okay. And then you end up with John Adams' presidency, which is always the funniest one to me, because he is the president that has to deal with having a vice president of a totally different political party. So he's number 2, John Adams. Okay. And he's got maybe some good things he does and some bad things he does. And so on the bad side, we talk about the Alien and Sedition Acts. Which violates the First Amendment. Okay. So if you think of them, they're trying to take away freedom of speech. Okay. So you think of it like they're trying to gag the other side, not let the other side win. So in order to make the Democratic Republicans weaker, these Federalists that are in power, because John Adams is a Federalist, passed these laws, the Alien and Sedition Acts, that undermine them. Well, of course, obviously, the Democratic Republicans are not going to take that lying down. So they write the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions. Okay. And the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions say that states should have the power to nullify. Guys, the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions don't really do anything. They're not laws. They have no real weight or power. They are just these, like, literally, it's like I write an opinion that's approved by the state of Texas. So, like, if I wrote a whole thing about how I think that school districts should be able to implement year-round school, and then I get the governor of Texas to sign my little document, that doesn't mean we have year-round school. It doesn't mean there's a new law. It doesn't change what the federal government is doing. It's just kind of my opinion that I got the government to sign on. And that's what the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions are. Yes, they're essentially just Madison and Jefferson complaining. But they say states should have the power to nullify a law. And over again, we're going to see an argument about that come back. Because now, 20 years from now, after these two people are deceased, you're going to have people in the South going, hey, wait a second, you're trying to ban slavery, but Jefferson and Madison said we can nullify a law. Okay. Oh, wait, you're trying to pass a really high tax. Jefferson and Madison said we can nullify a law. So this argument, and it's going to be North versus South every time, this argument, North versus South, can the state nullify a law, is going to come up over and over again. And that issue is actually going to be one of the major causes of the Civil War. So it says states can nullify a law. And remember, when we say nullify, this is our, okay, nullify means to cancel. Nullify means to cancel. So this is a pretty big argument, okay, about federal power and can states override the federal government, and who should be more powerful, states or the federal government? And so it's a states' rights issue. Can states nullify a law? So that's kind of the half of what's going on with Adams. The other half of what's going on with Adams is this stuff with France, right? Which was kind of a fun story about the XYZ affair. And these, like, three guys, and we don't know who they are. And they're, like, coming up to us and then threatening America. And they're like, hey, you better pay us some money or we're going to beat you up, is essentially what they tell us, okay? So they threaten us and they want a bribe. And it's with France. So France threatens us and they want a bribe. And we tell them no. We say this phrase, millions for defense, not 1 cent for tribute. It's a really important quote because it's a rallying cry for the country against France. And it really just means we would rather spend millions of dollars beating you up than pay you even just a little penny to stay away. Millions for defense, not 1 cent for tribute. Okay, and yes, that's involved with the XYZ affair. That's part of the XYZ affair, okay? And obviously Americans get really mad and they want to fight France, okay? And what's going to end up happening is you split the Federalist Party in half, okay? Because they're going to lose power because half of them want to go fight France and half of them don't want to fight France. But those are really the three major key points of what's going on with John Adams, okay? The Alien and Sedition Acts are limiting free speech, trying to take that away. You have the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions that are really just Jefferson and Madison complaining, but it says states can nullify a law. And you have the XYZ affair, okay? Okay. Sorry, my 4-year-old's in here with me, hiding behind a chair. Okay. And that's number 2, John Adams. So again, we start off with President. We wrote the Constitution, and right as soon as we write, we're going to have this argument: loose with lots of powers for the federal government, or strict, which means just word for word what's in there. I mean, they wanted to attack us. They didn't actually want to attack us. That's part of the whole reason that we don't have a war with France. They didn't really want to attack us. They just wanted to threaten us to see if they could get more money. They need money to fight Britain. They're fighting Britain. And they're just threatening us to see if they could get money. We stand up to them and it works and they back down. Okay, as soon as we tell them, back off, no, we're not giving you any money, they're like, okay, fine, we'll leave you alone. George Washington is our first president. We have Hamilton's financial plan. He wants to raise taxes, start some tariffs, and a bank tariffs. Just remember, tariffs raise the cost of imported goods, foreign goods, goods from Europe, European goods, British goods. Those are all mean the same thing. Imported, foreign, European, British, all of those mean the same thing. So no matter how they ask the question, just remember, tariffs raise the price of goods from other countries, from over there. Tariffs far away gets more expensive. And the reason is because we want people to buy American products. We want them to buy manufactured American products from the North. Remember, we talked a lot about tariffs help industry. They do not help agriculture. So if you say anything about a tariff and the answer is like, ooh, increases in agriculture. No. Tariffs help industry. They do not help agriculture. So the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions say that the states should have the power to nullify or cancel a law. So basically, Jefferson and Madison are just coming out and saying, hey, we think that this is a power that states should have. We think states should have the power to nullify or cancel a law. Remember, that's why we always, and you're going to hear that word nullify all semester long, because I told you it's going to come up again and again. So you always want to think nullify means to cancel. Okay. Farewell address, no political parties, so on and so forth. We talked about the formation of the first two political parties. Okay. And we talked about our second president and the issues that he has during his presidency. Mrs. Potato, that's correct. They cannot currently do that. The Civil War pretty much answers that question finally and says, no, they don't have the power to do that. But before that, all the way from the beginning of our country, all the way up to the Civil War, it's a kind of a back and forth. It's a back and forth. It's a back and forth. And we'll talk about, there is actually a couple presidents that let them do it. So it gets very confusing, really, when you look at it legally. But today, that is not allowed. Absolutely. Federal government always reigns supreme. It is the head out of everything. But then it's a back and forth. It's an argument. Who should be more powerful, federal or state, federal or state, federal or state? Okay. And that's going to be one of the issues that really takes us into the Civil War. Number 3, Tommy J. Thomas Jefferson, Tommy J. And Tommy J's presidency is funny because Thomas Jefferson is the first Democratic Republican president. And so you see this switch in power, right? With John Adams, the Federalists are in charge. With John Adams, the Federalists are in charge, okay? And he's a Federalist, and he tries to increase the national government. And he wants to make the national government bigger and bigger and bigger. And then when Tommy J wins in 1800, his whole plan is to make the federal government smaller. Because he's a Democratic Republican, he wants a small federal government. He thinks states should be more powerful. So he wants to shrink the federal government. And he does take some steps to do that. He cuts taxes. He reduces tariffs. But he also ended up not following his own politics. That's right, Mrs. Potato. Because he made the Louisiana Purchase. And the Louisiana Purchase requires a loose interpretation of the Constitution, which is not what Tommy J believed in. So it's really one of those interesting moments where he has to sit down and he goes, what's more important? Holding fast to my political beliefs or doubling the size of the nation? The second president of the United States was John Adams. Okay, number 2, J.A. John Adams. Okay. I'm going to turn in my spiral to our 1800 notes that we copied down the other day. And it's on page 112. And it just talks about the election of 1800 and the effects of the election of 1800. A very, very exciting election. This is the election where Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr tie 35 times. Hamilton steps in, gets people to vote for Jefferson. Aaron Burr gets mad, challenges Hamilton to a duel. They fight a duel. Hamilton is shot and killed. And it's the end of the Federalist Party because Adams loses. He comes in third. He doesn't even come in second. He's voted out of office by a lot. And then Hamilton dies. So that's really the end of the Federalist Party. They're going to go away. We're going to have a half a man for a while. And then it also is a peaceful transition of power from one political party to its enemy, to a political party of the opposite side. So that's a really big deal, and it shows democracy can work. And then finally is the appointment of the midnight judges, okay? These last-minute judges that John Adams appoints after he loses the election and he's lost, he is like running around appointing judges, and one of those is John Marshall. Yes, Adams's career is dead, and Hamilton is actually dead. Hamilton is actually dead, physically deceased. Okay, so Thomas Jefferson. The first thing we're going to talk about with Thomas Jefferson isn't really Thomas Jefferson's deal. It's John Marshall. Okay, and John Marshall is a special guy. He's his own teak. Okay. And he is the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And we're going to talk about him over and over again because John Marshall is Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He's appointed by John Adams, and he is a Federalist. He's a Federalist, and every single court case that he is involved in increases the power of the federal government. The first one of these that's really important is Marbury versus Madison. We talked about this. You will talk about the Supreme Court case of Marbury versus Madison in 11th grade U.S. history, in 12th grade government, in college government, and in college U.S. history. It is one of the most important court cases in American history. You do not need to have the entire story of Marbury v. Madison memorized. All you need to know is that Marbury v. Madison establishes judicial review. In every class today, I said this like 18 times, okay? Literally, I just sat there and repeated it over and over and over and over again. The Madison in Marbury v. Madison is actually James Madison, the same Madison that we've been talking about ever since we were writing the Constitution. So it's that Madison. But again, honestly, you don't really need to know who Madison and Marbury are. Okay? What you need to know about Marbury v. Madison is that it establishes the power of judicial review, which is the ability to declare a law constitutional or unconstitutional. It is the most important power. And I'm going to encourage y'all not to call it M&M because our next court case is McCulloch v. Maryland. It's also an M&M court case. But this is Marbury v. Madison, and it can say whether something's constitutional or unconstitutional, which is an increase in the power of the federal government. And it all comes down to the fact that John Marshall is a Federalist. So this guy, John Marshall, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, he is the judge sitting here. He listens to this case. He says, I'm going to increase the power of the federal government because I'm a Federalist by giving the court the power of judicial review, the power to declare something unconstitutional or constitutional. Okay, so this is sort of the memorization chain you need, okay? John Marshall is the guy who does this. When you see John Marshall, you got to associate him with judicial review. When you see Marbury versus Madison, you want to associate that with judicial review. And if you sit there and you go, oh, what is judicial review? Constitutional, unconstitutional. Is a law constitutional or unconstitutional? Okay, so everything kind of flows to this concept of judicial review. But just think about this. This is pretty simple seeming, but I can ask this question in 8 ways. I mean, like so many ways, right? Because I can say, what was John Marshall mostly responsible for doing? Establishing judicial review. Judicial review was established in what court case? Marbury v. Madison. The power of declaring a law constitutional or unconstitutional was established by who? John Marshall. So notice how I can come at this from any direction. So you want to get all these things linked in your brain so that when the question comes at it from any direction, you can get to the answer. Okay, so get these items linked up in your brain. And the only reason we put this in number 3 is because that's when it happened. It's not really related to TJ at all. It's just something that happens while he's president. It's just something that happens while he's president. So TJ doesn't even really need to be part of this memorization chain. It's just this stuff in the green bubble. That's where your memorization chain needs to be. Okay? All right. Now let's talk about what TJ actually does do. Besides cut taxes, reduce the military, and shrink the federal government. We're going to leave the Louisiana Purchase for last because that's our hot date and it's pretty important. So obviously he gets the Louisiana Purchase, but other things that he does is he fights pirates. We talked about that. Honestly, that's more of a fun fact than something that you get into. He fought pirates for 4 years. And then, yes, super play. Marbury versus Madison made judicial review. Marbury versus Madison made judicial review. Marbury versus Madison made judicial review. So TJ, he fights the pirates. And then the other big thing that he's going to be doing here is this conflict he has with Britain and France. Okay. So Britain and France start doing that impressment of sailors. And remember, impressment is bad because that's when they're forcing our sailors into work. Okay, impressment of sailors. So they like stop an American boat, take all the sailors off of it, sink the American boat, and make all of the sailors work on in their navy. Okay, so impressment of sailors, which we don't like. It's bad. Bad. And of course, Thomas Jefferson sort of loses his cool about this. Okay, he like flips his lid. This has been going on now, just so you understand, this has been going on now for like 8 years under George Washington, 4 more under John Adams, and another 4 under TJ. So you're talking about 16 years. The British and the French have been doing this off and on. First it's the British, then it's the French, now it's the British and the French. So Thomas Jefferson sort of flips his lid and he passes 2 laws. One first, and then he kind of backs off, okay? So it's almost like when your parents give you a punishment that's way over the top and then they back off and they're like, no, fine, you can breathe, you just can't breathe near me, okay? They say the Embargo Act, that's the big one. That's the one that's all like, no one can trade with anyone. So he says, if you're an American, you can't trade with anyone, period, end of story. Okay. Now that's a problem because that's how we got all our money is by trading with people. The South traded agricultural products like cotton and tobacco and sugar, and the North traded its manufactured products while they were still a little tiny baby industry. That's how people made their money is by trading with Europe. So that was really bad, and it actually almost crashes the economy. It's really bad, okay? And it's a vast overreaction, like OMG, okay? Like what? Crazy. So he says, okay, fine. I'm going to back off, and I'm going to pass the Non-Intercourse Act. Okay, which means you can't trade with Britain and France. So you can trade with everyone else. Spain, fine. Italy, fine. Germany, fine. China, fine. India, fine. Africa, fine. not Britain and not France. People are still pretty upset about this. It actually kind of is at the end of his 8 years as president, and it makes him pretty unpopular at the end. And it makes him pretty unpopular by the end. So that's really like the part that's related to him, other than the Louisiana Purchase. So he doesn't really actually have a lot going on. He's got Britain and France are the ones who were impressing the sailors. So they were the ones he was actually specifically mad at. It's like if you got two kids in class who are talking and then the teacher yells and everybody in the classroom gets in trouble. That's the Embargo Act. Everyone in the classroom got in trouble. You can't trade with anybody. And then the teacher backs off and says, okay, never mind. Only the two kids who are talking get in trouble, Britain and France. So they're the two talking. They're the ones who are impressing the sailors. They're the ones who are attacking our ships. Okay, so they're the ones who are bugging us. So they're the ones we're going to not trade with anymore. Okay. And the last thing is 1803. It's a hot date. I'd expect several questions on it tomorrow. Okay, so 1803, that's the date of the Louisiana Purchase. And the biggest effect is it doubles the size of our nation. Okay, so it's going to double the size of our nation. We buy it from France. We were trying to get New Orleans and the Mississippi River. That's what we were trying to get, is New Orleans and the Mississippi River. Okay. Go ahead. I'll come in and give you a hug and kiss from you just a little bit, okay? Okay, so we buy it from France. We wanted the New Orleans and Mississippi River. Napoleon needed money to attack Russia, so he's like, take all of it. I don't want it. Give me $15 million. And we do. We're like, heck yes. And it's a fantastic buy, guys. It's a fantastic deal. Doubling the size of our nation, it comes out to like 2.5 cents an acre. And of course, if we double our size, we double our power, we get a ton more farmland, and people are going to be able to start moving west. And this is really the beginning of westward expansion, which is a huge impact and movement for our country. And it really sets America up to start thinking about, hey, you know what? We're actually a pretty great country, and we've got a lot going for us. And I think that this is really the last thing that says, hey, the revolution was worth it. All of it was worth it. We have our own country. Our democracy works. The election of 1800 worked. We bought Louisiana. We have twice as big now. We're kind of growing in power, and it's huge. Miss Potato, it was 10 million, but that's not as important knowing what we originally offered. The big thing is that we settled on the purchase for $15 million. And that we buy it from France, and that Thomas Jefferson is the one who does it. And then the last thing is that weird catch 22. Okay, it depends on. So, yeah, Miss Potato. It's one of those things in history where different people say different things because it depends on who you were talking to about what exactly we wanted. Okay, we want New Orleans because it's a port. Okay, so if you think of an airport is a hub where airplanes go in and out. A port, just the word port by itself, is a hub where boats go in and out for trade. We wanted control of the port so that we could use it for trade. We wanted to be able to sail down the Mississippi River and use New Orleans for trade. Okay, so we want that port. That's why New Orleans is so important to us. Okay, it's because of the port. The only negative thing in the Louisiana Purchase is it requires a loose interpretation of the Constitution. It requires a loose interpretation of the Constitution. Thanks, Leanne. Thanks, Leanne. Okay. And that really goes against what Jefferson believes. But in the long run, he decides it's more important to have that, the land and get the power and the resources, the natural resources, so many natural resources in that land, and the power and everything than it is for him to be right. And really, that's probably one of the best things Thomas Jefferson does as president is he says, it's less important that I'm right and more important that we do something good for America. Okay. And he sends off Lewis and Clark to go and explore it. Honestly, that's less important for us in this period of time talking about it. It is, there's a big expedition, they go and explore it, and that's sort of the summary. Okay, and you guys, that's really all the information. It's a really short unit. Our next unit's going to be pretty short too. There's just a lot of kind of minor things. Hamilton's financial plan, knowing what a tariff is, that's a pretty big deal. Understanding loose construction of the loose interpretation of the Constitution, and strict interpretation, the first political parties, how they had this split to form XYZ Affair, Kentucky and Virginia resolutions. Who is John Marshall? Why is he important? What is Marbury versus Madison? Why is it important? What is judicial review? The power to declare something constitutional or unconstitutional. So I'm just going to sit. We're only at about 41 minutes right now, but I want to see what kind of questions you have. You might check out the TEACS questions on page 101 in your spiral if you want to kind of judge what you might need more information on. I'm going to eat my dinner while you ask questions. Mm-hmm. Good question. Let me pull up the Quizlet. And if you're ever looking for my Quizlet group or whatever, my Quizlet name is Amy_Foster-Munoz. And you can use that to search whatever Quizlets that I have. And this is the New Nation Quizlet. Here's the link. Okay. There it is, and it's called the Goodson. Let me look at the exact name. Goodson Middle School New Nation Review is the full name of that. Goodson Middle School New Nation Review. You're welcome. Okay, so Superplay asked, why did France attack us? So this is kind of an understanding of politics. You have two countries that are attacking each other, right? These two countries, they're fighting. And this is Britain and France. And they're always fighting. I swear, like they fight, they take a break, they fight, they take a break. So Britain and France are fighting each other. And America, being a brand new country, we don't want to get involved. We're going to follow and stay neutral. But we want to trade with both of them. So we're trading with both of them. Okay? So you think of it if you've got two buddies and they're fighting and they both want you to take sides and you're like, I'm not taking sides. Well, then they might turn and start attacking you. And that's what happens is Britain and France both start attacking our ships because our ships are going to trade and they don't want us to trade with Britain, so they attack our ships. And Britain doesn't want us to trade with France, so they attack our ships. So all we're trying to do is run a business, and they just don't like that we're doing business with someone that they're fighting with. Okay? So the fact that we're doing business with someone they're fighting with, that makes them attack us. Okay, okay, all right, I see that. I'm going to answer Aveline and then LM. Okay, so Aveline, what was the compromise regarding the National Bank? The compromise is this. So you have to remember there's two things they're fighting over. The National Bank and where will the capital be? Okay, Jefferson wants the capital in the South Alexander Hamilton wants it in the North. Jefferson does not want a national bank. Alexander Hamilton wants a national bank. So there's two things they're fighting about. And finally, they decide we're not getting anywhere. Let's compromise. Hamilton gets the bank. Jefferson gets the capital in the South. So that's the compromise. You get to win one of the arguments. I get to win the other argument. Hamilton gets to have his bank. Jefferson gets to have the capital moved to Washington, D.C. in the South. Okay, so the capital is going to move to Washington, D.C. in the South to end this conflict. So Hamilton has his plan. There's a conflict about it. People don't like his plan. They say, let's compromise. Let's give you your bank. You can win that. And then in return, we're going to move the capital to the South. Okay, so it's really Hamilton and Jefferson who are kind of having this argument. And then they're the ones who kind of create this compromise. Okay, number one notes on page, I think it's 104 on the back. The top one on the back is really good for that. So if you look at page 104, look at the top slide on the back. That is going to really kind of go into that compromise in a little more detail. Okay, LMJM, issues faced by the first three presidents. Okay, so George Washington's biggest issues are Hamilton and Jefferson fighting. And he's dealing with these he sees these political parties start to form and he's trying to stop it. Thanks. And another issue he faces is Britain is impressing the sailors and he's trying to stop that. And then the Whiskey Rebellion. So those are his three things. He has to guide the nation through this fight over the national bank. He has to guide the nation through the Whiskey Rebellion and show that the nation is strong. And he has to deal with this issue of Britain. Okay. Whiskey Rebellion is about a tax. They're rebelling because of a tax. So they put a tax on whiskey and the farmers get angry about it and they rise up and they start burning buildings and carrying pitchforks. And Washington's like, forget that. And he ends it. Give me just a second, Super Plan. I'll answer your question. John Adams, his big issues are the Alien and Sedition Acts, which lead to the Kentucky and Virginia Resolution, and then the XYZ Affair are his three major issues. And Thomas Jefferson's major issues are the Louisiana Purchase and the with France and Britain, getting in that fight with France and Britain and passing the Embargo Act, trying to end trade. Okay, the difference between a tariff and a protective tariff. A tariff is a tax on imported goods that's usually designed to make money. We tend to use those two words interchangeably. So if I say a tariff, and when I'm talking and I'm teaching, if I say a tariff, I mean a protective tariff at that time. At the beginning of our nation, all tariffs are protective tariffs. A protective tariff is a tariff that is specially designed to protect American goods. You tax foreign goods, European goods, at a high rate with the specific purpose of making them more expensive than American goods. A normal tariff, like if this is how much American good costs and this is how much a good from China costs, and I add a normal tariff, it might only bump it to that part. China might still be cheaper. A protective tariff says if this is how much America costs and this is how much China's product costs, we're going to take it all the way up to here. The goal is to make America's products cheaper, so more people will buy them because we want people to buy American products, not British products, not French products, not European products, American products. So we're going to use the protective tariff to make them more expensive. So if here's American tea and here's British tea, I'm going to add that protective tariff. Now British tea is more expensive. And everyone in the South is going to get angry because now all their European goods that they're used to buying are more expensive. Superplay, you just need to know that there is a Lewis and Clark expedition, that it's two guys. It's actually a huge group of guys, but Lewis and Clark lead this expedition, and it's just to explore the Louisiana Purchase. Okay, you don't really need to get into the nitty-gritty details about it. It's really just we bought something, now we need to figure out what it is. It's like my daughter's obsessed with those toys right now, and they come in the like all like the LOL things or the surprise things, where it's like you can't see what's inside it. You have to open it up, and then, huh, surprise! What did you get? That's like the Louisiana Purchase. We buy it, we don't know what's in there. We got to go find out what's in there. We're gonna open it up. What did we get? Okay, so the Alien and Sedition Acts. The Alien and Sedition Acts are a law passed by John Adams, and the Alien Act makes it harder to become a citizen. So it's punishing immigrants. It makes it harder to become a citizen, and it makes it so that you can be kicked out for just being suspicious. Not for getting in trouble, just for you're suspicious, we kick you out. And the whole reason they did that is because they didn't want the immigrants to vote for the Democratic Republican Party. And the Sedition Acts are saying if you talk bad about the government, they're going to put you in jail. And again, this is about attacking the Democratic Republican Party. So both of those laws are against both of them violate the Constitution. Both of them take away individual rights. So they're both really problematic. Yeah, civic virtue is the responsibilities of a citizen should have. Civic virtue literally just means good citizen. Good citizen. So when they ask about like what makes Washington an example of civic virtue, putting down the Whiskey Rebellion, stepping down after 2 terms, that's an excellent example of civic virtue because the entire reason he did that was to be a good citizen so that he would not become a tyrant, so that he would not become too powerful. He gave up power so that everyone else would copy him. Yes. So John Adams, people are like, people do accuse him, you're being a tyrant, you're acting George. And so he gets very unpopular. And that's why he's only in office for 4 years. They vote him out. I think it's a great thing, and it's a great thing about our democracy that it doesn't take us 10 or 15 or 20 presidents to practice popular sovereignty. Right there, our second president, we don't like him. So what happens? When it comes time, we don't reelect him. It's a great example of how democracy can work. Democracy works. We didn't like the president, we voted him out. Second president of the United States. Kicked to the curb because he was being a tyrant. And that's what George was afraid of. George didn't want to be a tyrant. George Washington didn't want to be a tyrant. So he steps down from office. Those are all good questions. So civic virtue is good citizen. Being a good citizen. So that's what I was talking about with George Washington, and the example of him stepping down from office is an example of civic virtue, of being a good citizen, serving your country to benefit your country, not to benefit yourself. John Marshall said the law, yes. So John Marshall establishes the power of judicial review. Judicial review is a power that the Supreme Court has. Okay, and then declaring whether a law is constitutional or unconstitutional is what that power is. It's like the definition of judicial review. So what does John Marshall establish? He establishes judicial review. Well, what is judicial review? The ability to say whether a law is constitutional or unconstitutional. So whether a law is constitutional or unconstitutional describes the power of judicial review. Who started judicial review? John Marshall. When did he start it? In the court case of Marbury v. Madison. That's 4 kind of info points right there. John Marshall, Marbury versus Madison, judicial review. What is judicial review? A law deciding whether a law is constitutional or unconstitutional. And that's a power the Supreme Court still has to this day. It's actually one of their most important powers. Yes. You can redo this test if necessary. Absolutely. This is a great one to redo because you have so much time. Bye, Mrs. Potato. Yeah, by the way, I'm going to give it about 1 more minute. See if anybody else has any questions. We've done a very thorough review. It's a really good review. Don't forget, you can always watch it again or listen to it in the morning. Stay focused on things. We did a lot of storytelling in these notes because the story kind of helps understand how things go. But remember, like with Marbury v. Madison, you don't need to remember the whole story of who is Marbury and who is Madison and why are they suing each other or why is Marbury suing Madison. You just need to remember that Marbury versus Madison is the court case that gives us judicial review. Okay, and it's presided over by the judge in that case. The Chief Justice is John Marshall. So that's sometimes it helps to kind of simplify and focus the topics. Jefferson is a Democratic Republican. You're welcome, Ellen. Jefferson is a Democratic Republican, yeah. Hamilton is a Federalist. John Adams is a Federalist. Jefferson is a Democratic Republican. Okay. All right, that's about a minute. So I'm going to go ahead and go. Thanks for joining us. Y'all have a great night.